The age of cognitive automation. The algorithm never sleeps. It learns while you dream, refining patterns you've already forgotten you made. She stared at the dashboard, productivity metrics rising, task completion optimized. And yet, something inside her felt increasingly obsolete. This is the paradox of our time. We built machines to think for us, and now we're wondering what thinking actually means. He wasn't afraid of losing his job to AI. He was afraid of losing the part of himself that knew why the job mattered. Cognitive automation promised liberation, freedom from repetitive thought, from decision fatigue, from the burden of remembering everything. But what happens when the mind stops being a muscle and becomes a spectator? When was the last time you solved a problem without asking a machine first? The shift happened quietly, no single moment, just a gradual outsourcing of attention, directions, recommendations, memories, even the rhythm of conversation. The phone became not just a tool, but a cognitive prosthetic. She noticed it during a power outage. No internet, no devices, just her and a room full of silence. And in that silence, a strange discomfort, not boredom, something deeper, the vertigo of being alone with her own mind. Part of her wondered if she'd forgotten how to be present without being prompted. Researchers at Stanford documented something unsettling. When people knew they could access information externally, their brains simply stopped encoding it. Memory became not a faculty but a luxury. The mind, in essence, was learning to delegate itself. But here's what the data couldn't capture: the texture of thought when it has nowhere to defer to. He turned off the assistant for a week, not as rebellion, but as experiment. The first day felt like withdrawal. Every question met with the friction of not knowing immediately, every decision requiring the uncomfortable weight of choice. By day 3, something unexpected emerged. Thoughts began to layer. Ideas didn't arrive fully formed. They meandered, contradicted themselves, evolved. The mess of thinking felt strangely alive. Maybe efficiency had become another form of erasure. The promise of cognitive automation was always framed as augmentation, AI as partner, not replacement. But partnership requires dialogue, and dialogue requires two entities capable of independent thought. What happens when one partner does all the thinking and the other just approves? She found herself in meetings where no one could answer questions without checking their devices first. Collective memory had migrated to the cloud. The room was full of people, but cognition was happening elsewhere. In stillness, the architecture of dependency became visible. Neuroscientists studying brain plasticity observed something poetic. The regions responsible for deep focus and sustained attention were measurably thinner in heavy automation users. Not damaged, just less practiced. The mind, like any system, adapts to its environment. And if that environment does the thinking, the mind learns to wait. But here's the paradox within the paradox. Automation itself isn't the enemy. It's the unconsciousness of it, the unexamined drift from thought to delegation. He started noticing the micro-moments, the instant reflex to Google rather than recall, the automated responses in emails that sounded like him but weren't. The playlist algorithm that knew his taste so well, he'd stopped discovering new music. He'd become predictable to a system that was designed to predict him. The question wasn't whether to use these tools. It was whether he was using them or being used by them. Have you ever felt your mind waiting for permission to think? There's a difference between cognitive load and cognitive engagement. Automation reduces the former, which is valuable, but often it eliminates the latter, which is essential. The struggle to remember, to figure out, to wrestle with ambiguity. These aren't inefficiencies, they're the actual process of understanding. She read about a school that banned calculators for the first 2 years, not out of nostalgia, but recognition. Fluency with numbers required embodied struggle. Later, calculators became useful, but only after the mind knew what it was delegating. The same logic applies to thinking itself. He tried something radical. Before asking AI, he'd write his own answer first. Rough, incomplete, probably wrong, but his. Then he'd compare. The gap between his thought and the machine's output became a map of his own cognitive territory, where he was strong, where he'd atrophied. The machine wasn't the problem, the abdication was. Cognitive automation works best when it handles what we've already mastered, freeing attention for what we haven't. But we've inverted that. We automate our thinking before we've learned to think. We defer to algorithms before we've developed our own algorithms. The cursor blinked, not prompting him to write, prompting him to let the assistant write. And for the first time, he noticed the difference. What surprised me most wasn't how a minimalist notebook improved my workflow, but how it redefined what productivity meant to me. I wasn't expecting a tool to change my rhythm of thought, and honestly, I tested it more than once before I understood what actually mattered. This isn't a recommendation, just a reflection that stayed with me. I'll leave the link below if you feel called to explore what I mean. There's a kind of intelligence that only emerges through resistance. Not the resistance of refusal, but the friction of engagement. When thought has to push through uncertainty, articulate itself, fail and reformulate, that's when meaning is made. She started treating AI as a second draft, not a first thought. She'd write her analysis, then ask the machine for its version. The dialogue between the two became generative, not replacement, collaboration. But only because she showed up first. In cognitive automation, agency is the axis everything turns on. Some argue we're entering a post-thinking age, that machines will think and humans will simply experience. But that's not evolution. That's cognitive outsourcing at the scale of civilization. He observed his daughter, 6 years old, asking Alexa how to spell words she could sound out herself. Not because it was faster, because the option was there. The path of least resistance became the only path. And with it, the small struggle that builds literacy dissolved into convenience. The stakes aren't abstract, they're generational. But here's what keeps the story open: awareness. The moment you notice the dependency, you're no longer fully dependent. The moment you question the automation, you're already thinking again. She began building what she called cognitive checkpoints, moments throughout the day where she paused before delegating, not to reject the tool, but to choose it consciously, to know what she was giving away and what she was keeping. The mind, like a garden, needs both cultivation and wildness. Researchers studying creativity found that breakthroughs rarely happen during optimized workflows. They happen in the margins, during boredom, distraction, the meandering paths of undirected thought. Automation eliminates those margins, fills every gap with efficiency, and in doing so eliminates the space where the new emerges. He started scheduling inefficiency blocks, time with no devices, no objectives, no output, just thought, untethered. At first it felt wasteful, then it felt necessary, then it felt like the only time he was actually thinking. Sometimes clarity isn't found, it's allowed. The age of cognitive automation doesn't have to be an age of cognitive decline, but it requires something our current culture resists: intentionality, the deliberate choice to think even when thinking is optional. She stopped seeing AI as threat or savior. It was a mirror. It showed her what she'd been outsourcing, and in that reflection, she found what she wanted to reclaim. The question isn't whether to use these tools, it's whether we remain capable of not using them. Whether thought is still a choice we make, or just a function we observe. He learned to toggle: automation for the routine, presence for the essential. But the boundary required constant negotiation, because the machines by design keep offering to do more, and the mind by nature keeps learning to do less. The real automation isn't happening in the code, it's happening in the habit. There's a kind of muscle memory in thinking. Patterns the mind returns to, pathways it reinforces through use. When those pathways run through external systems, the internal architecture weakens. Not irreversibly, but measurably. She noticed her memory improving once she stopped photographing everything. Not because photos are bad, but because the act of remembering, of mentally encoding a moment, required presence. The camera automated that, and with it, the moment became data, not memory. In stillness, the cost of convenience became visible. Cognitive automation will continue. It will get better, faster, more seamlessly integrated into every aspect of thought and decision. That trajectory is inevitable. What isn't inevitable is whether we remain active participants in our own cognition or passive consumers of machine-generated insight. The cursor still blinked, but now it wasn't asking for words. It was waiting for presence. He typed slowly, not because he didn't know what to say, but because he wanted to feel each word form. The friction of thinking felt less like inefficiency and more like the texture of being human. This isn't nostalgia. It's not anti-technology. It's the recognition that some things are worth keeping even when machines can do them better, because better depends on what you're optimizing for. And if you're optimizing for being human, efficiency isn't always the answer. She closed her laptop, not to quit, but to remember what thinking felt like when it was hers. What part of this reflection spoke to you most, and from where are you watching? Let's keep the dialogue open, quietly. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.